Introduction to Paper 4. Now, Paper 4 is not really a paper. It is just your final oral component that goes towards your final assessment for the year. And it entails oral tasks that you do in class with your teacher, and the mark that you get during the course of the year is set in stone. You have that mark out of 50 before you even start to write your paper 1, 2, and 3 at the end of the year. So it's actually quite a nice way of getting marks together and really trying to do well in this component so that it can contribute nicely to your final mark. So what exactly is oral communication? What it implies is that it's communication that takes place through your mouth. It is communication through mouth, through speaking. So either you are speaking and somebody else is listening, or you are listening and somebody else is speaking. It includes a variety of activities. For instance, informal conversations, like you converse with your friend, with your parents, about school, etc. And it can either be a direct, as in mouth to mouth, or it can be telephonic or via other media. And then, of course, it includes aspects such as speeches that you must either make or that you must listen to, presentations that you have to deliver orally, discussions. All of these things are forms of oral communication, and all of that has to be part of the year's work, the year's assessment. Then, of course, we also get face-to-face communication of a different kind, for instance, in meetings, where you have to contribute orally, but you also have to listen very carefully, and that there's a flow of information left and right between speaker and listener. Also lectures, where you have to listen, take notes, remember things, etc. In conferences, interviews. So can you see that the oral component of your English language is actually very important, because it has its extension into your workplace one day. And all of these things within the workplace help to build a certain rapport between the employers and the employees, etc. And it can also build a lot of trust. It's a very, very important component of your language learning. In fact, speaking and listening are actually two things that define us as human beings. I mean, you don't see a dog sitting and talking to another dog, and then the dog sits and listens and takes notes. It's a different thing. They bark and they growl. But human beings can actually exchange information through listening and speaking. It's part of our everyday lives. It is a skill, though. It is something that you need to hone. You have to work on it. It involves, of course, the speaker and the listener, and then in between there is a message. The speaker has a message that he sends or she sends to the listener, and then, of course, the roles can change around. The speaker becomes the listener, etc. And you must always, always be aware of the context, because the speaking is so important. We talked about trust and so forth that can be built. You must always be very careful how you speak and also how you listen within a certain context, that you sort of keep certain things to yourself, process things in your head before you respond, because it's very often a sensitive situation. Always be aware of your audience, and always be aware of the purpose of this of the oral communication, whether it's a conference or whatever it is. What is the purpose of it? And that will tell you how to respond. But the whole idea of content and presentation, in other words, the content of the speech or the content of what you are discussing in the panel and the presentation actually go hand in hand. If the one is unsuccessful, the other one is going to fail as well. The content is not going to come across if the presentation is not good. So it can be excellent content but poor presentation, and the other way around. So they really, really work hand in hand. One needs to remember that all the time through every oral task that you get. Remember this, that the content and the presentation cannot be separated. You're going to always have to be aware of your word choice, your diction. You're going to have to look at your style to make sure that it suits your audience, your tone, that you don't offend anybody, say, for instance, in a work situation, and that your register is correct, that you don't address a senior person that's not your friend in a colloquial way. Make sure that your register is correct. Make sure that you pause for maximum effect. Make sure that you pace whatever you're saying well, and that your body language works together with your content, and that your posture is correct. If you slouch over a boardroom table, it's not going to work really. And if you're listening, you should sit up straight and be attentive and look as though you are listening, in fact. But learning a language is, of course, a holistic process. So listening and speaking are only two components. Listening, here we've got it, and speaking are two components in what you do in a classroom situation every day. You're not going to only speak. If everybody just speaks, it's not going to work. Somebody has to listen while somebody's speaking. And while somebody is speaking, while a teacher is speaking, you will take notes or you'll write something. Or as a post-listening or speaking exercise, you'll have to write something creative or something. And reading also goes hand in hand with it. You cannot separate the four components of language learning. And you can see how they are also interlinked in this Venn diagram. So listening and speaking, therefore, are the two components that they don't stand alone, and they are also codependent skills. Keep that in mind. Formal and informal listening. You get formal listening, you get informal listening, and speaking exercises. All of these things are always integrated with a bit of reading, with a bit of writing, and language comes into play, obviously, because you can't write a proper piece of writing if you don't know the language, and you can't understand the reading well if you don't know the language. So these are all interrelated. Let's see how that works, for instance. For instance, when you read aloud in class, right? You may be given a written text. So speaking may give written text an oral form. In other words, there's a written text. Now you read the written text and suddenly it becomes oral. Suddenly you hear it. It becomes by mouth, right? So it has an oral form. And while you're reading, you are interpreting the tone of the writer. So if you think he is acting suspiciously, you're going to get that suspicious tone or something. You're going to bring the written aspect into the oral aspect. If you look at the listening comprehension, and we're going to do that in more detail, exercises, they will involve also such an integrated activity. There will be a written text, but it will be read out by your teacher in oral form. And all you have to do is listen. You don't have the text in front of you. You listen to the writer's text via the voice of another person. Can you see how integrated this is? And then you are going to respond after having listened to reading, which is oral, which comes from the written text. You are going to respond intelligently to this text in a written form. So, prepared speeches is another one. Will test your ability to interact intelligently with a written text. In other words, you can't have a prepared speech if you don't prepare, and you're going to have to get some written and perhaps oral input to help you put the speech together, and then you're going to speak it, and somebody else might also be taking notes. So it's always an integrated, holistic exercise. So, as I said, you have to hone your listening and your speaking skills. It's very important because listening and speaking skills are vital. You cannot do without them in life, right? Strong listening skills, as I said here, will enable you to understand everything that's happening around you. You listen, well, you will understand what's going on because you will take it in. And good speaking skills will enable you to say everything, right? This is what for you to understand and to hear, and then also the speaking skills will enable you to say everything you want to say without a problem. Now, the oral component of your paper or of your assessment program will involve so the skills that you are required to have mastered will be the skills required for the listening comprehension. You're going to do one. Um, it's going to be tested in group discussions, forum discussions, various kinds of discussions. There will be two prepared speeches, and sometimes the teacher might decide to make it a prepared speech and prepared reading instead of another speech, or she may include in the prepared reading also a bit of formal discussion where she just talks to you about what you've read, whether you've understood what you read, etc. So the unprepared reading is also part of it because you also need to learn how to read unprepared, and you're also going to need your conversation strategies. For instance, in a forum discussion, you must know when to keep your mouth shut, when not to interrupt, please, because that actually takes away the quality of your response. So there are strategies that you need to learn about. How does it now work? How does the paper 4 fit into your final assessment? Now, as I said, paper 4 is not really a paper 4. It is just 4 assessment tasks, 2 prepared speeches, 1 unprepared, and 1 listening comprehension, which adds up to 50 marks, right? And as I said, that is set in stone before you even get your exam room. It's there. It's already there on in the teacher's mark book or on her mark sheet. Another thing which is also set in stone by the time you get to the final 3 papers is the year mark. Now, the interesting thing here is that the year mark consists of all the tasks and the assignments that you're given throughout the year, the ones that actually all add up towards your year mark, right? But the interesting thing is that the oral assignments are also part of the whole year mark assessment. So which means that your paper 4 or your oral abilities, it amounts to 50 marks that are said is set in stone, but it's also part of the 100 marks that for all your assignments during the course of the year. So it actually counts twice. Can you see that? So don't underestimate the value of the oral assessments. Do well in those as well as you can, because it's an opportunity to get marks. And then you can sit back and spend all your time on the actual written part of the exam, which is the end of the year. Then, of course, you have your written examinations, your 70 for paper 1, your 80 for literature paper 2, 100 for the writing, the 3 papers, and that adds up to 250, and then that is 100, and then you've got the 50, and what do you get in the end? 350, 400. There you have it. And then finally, this is your assessment mark at the end of the year. 400 marks divided by 4, which will give you your percentage.